At my dad's funeral, my aunt whispered, "Look at poor Chloe, still trying to get attention." My uncle added, "Her dad died a worthless criminal." My cousins snickered about my pathetic family, making fun of my shoes as I cried. And my mother, she just stood there, silent. Then 3 black sedans appeared. Men in sharp suits got out, bowed their heads, and said, "Miss Chloe, the boss is waiting." Seriously, look at her shoes, straight from the thrift store. My cousin Jessica's theatrical whisper sliced through the crisp October air as my father's casket was being prepared for lowering. She made sure I heard it. She always did. "And she's sobbing as if her father was some big shot," Jessica went on. "Not the neighborhood deadbeat he really was." Before we go any further, I just want to say thank you for being here to follow Chloe's story. If you believe that families should lift each other up, not crush each other down, please think about subscribing. It costs nothing, and it lets us bring you more stories just like this one. Now, let's get back to what happens. Her brother, Kyle, let out a short, sharp laugh of agreement. Aunt Susan wore a tight, satisfied smile. Uncle Robert nodded as if Jessica had just uttered some deep truth instead of pure cruelty. I kept my gaze fixed on my dad's coffin. It was a simple one, the best my mom and I could manage by pooling our money. The same one Uncle Robert had already loudly declared was pitiful for everyone at the gravesite to hear. My mom, Eleanor, stood next to me, a statue of silence, not defending Dad, not defending me, just standing there, the same way she had at every family event for the last 23 years while her relatives tore us to shreds. "He died a con man with nothing to his name," Uncle Robert announced to the few remaining mourners. "Trash families only produce trash children." That's when I heard the low hum of engines. 3 black sedans glided through the cemetery gates with a silent, synchronized grace. 6 men in perfectly tailored, expensive suits emerged. Their leader, a man with salt and pepper hair and an air of unmistakable, dangerous authority, walked straight toward me. He took my hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, and bowed his head as if I were a queen. "Miss Chloe, the boss has been waiting to meet you. Your father mentioned you every single day. Leo Ricci. In our city, everyone knew that name." My aunt made a strangled noise like she was choking. My uncle's face turned a pasty, sick-looking gray. They had just spent my father's funeral calling him a nobody, laughing at my tears and mocking my worn-out shoes. They had no idea who they had truly been messing with. The cemetery had fallen utterly still. It felt like even the wind held its breath, waiting to see the next move. The priest, who had been inching toward his car, was frozen mid-stride. The handful of mourners who had started to drift away were now rooted to the spot. Leo Ricci still held my hand, his grip light but firm, radiating a sense of command. Up close, I could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, the silver threads in his dark hair, and a small, faded scar on his left cheekbone that hinted at a life of surviving violence, not avoiding it. Behind him, the other 5 men stood in a loose formation, not overtly menacing, but exuding a kind of coiled energy that made it clear they could become so in a heartbeat if needed. One of them was holding a floral arrangement so enormous it looked like it belonged at a presidential funeral. White lilies and roses, a stark contrast to the modest bouquet my mom and I had picked out. "My apologies for the intrusion," Leo said, turning his head just enough to address the crowd. His voice was smooth, almost warm, but an undercurrent in it set my nerves on edge. "But Miss Chloe has business to attend to. Her father's real family would like to pay our respects." The way he stressed real family was anything but subtle. So was the way his eyes swept over Aunt Susan, Uncle Robert, and my cousins, before dismissing them as if they were nothing more than insects. The man with the massive floral arrangement stepped forward, placing it carefully beside Dad's grave. It dwarfed everything, a declaration in blossoms that said, "This man was important. This man was respected. This man's death brings men like us to his side." "Miss Chloe," Leo said, his focus returning to me. "When you're ready, the boss is eager to meet you. He would have come himself, but—" He paused, a delicate hesitation. "There were reasons your father kept certain parts of his life separate from you. The boss honored those wishes. But now that Michael has passed, there are things you need to know about your heritage." My heritage. The word felt alien, hanging in the quiet air like a question I didn't have the words to form. I glanced at my mother one last time. She was staring at Leo with an expression I had never seen on her face before, a perfect blend of terror and recognition. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady given that my world had just been knocked off its axis. She met my gaze for a fleeting second, then looked away. When she finally spoke, her voice was a faint whisper, yet it carried in the silent graveyard. "Go with them, Chloe. Your father, he would have wanted this." Those words were a confirmation of what I'd started to suspect the moment the sedans arrived. My mother had known something, maybe not the whole story, but she knew enough to understand that men in expensive suits bowing to her daughter weren't here by some random chance. She knew Dad had secrets, that he had a life beyond the simple insurance agent persona he'd maintained for over 2 decades. And she still stood silently while her family called him a broke con artist at his own funeral, still said nothing while they laughed at my grief and my shoes, still chose their validation over our dignity, even knowing there was more to the story than they could ever imagine. The betrayal in that silence cut deeper than any of Aunt Susan's or Uncle Robert's cruel words. I turned back to Leo. "I'll go with you." His expression softened into something like approval, or maybe it was respect. He offered me his arm, gesturing toward the lead sedan, with a movement that was both a gentlemanly invitation and an undeniable command. As I took his arm, Aunt Susan's voice shrieked behind us, laced with panic. "Eleanor, what is going on? Who are these men? What was Michael really into?" I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at my mother's face right then, I might say something I could never take back. Or worse, I might start crying again, and I refused to give her family the satisfaction of seeing me break. Leo escorted me to the sedan with a protective courtesy, as if I were something precious. One of his men opened the rear door. The inside was more luxurious than any car I had ever seen. The leather seats probably cost more than my entire college education. The trim was polished dark wood, and the whole atmosphere radiated a controlled power that felt both incredibly safe and incredibly dangerous at the same time. Leo slid into the seat opposite me. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing us in a bubble of silence while chaos erupted outside. Through the tinted glass, I saw Aunt Susan grabbing my mom's arm, her mouth moving in a frantic tirade. Uncle Robert was just staring at the sedans, his face a mask of dawning horror, as if he'd just realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. Jessica and Kyle were frozen, their earlier sneers replaced by wide-eyed fear. The sedan began to move, a smooth, silent glide. The cemetery disappeared behind us. "I know you have questions," Leo said softly. His voice was different now that we were away from the prying eyes of my mother's family, the performance over. "And you have a right to answers. But first, there's something critical you need to understand about your father." I waited, my hands balled into fists in my lap, still wearing the cheap shoes Jessica had ridiculed. "Michael Valenti was Giovanni Valenti's nephew," Leo said, watching my face closely for a reaction. "His mother, your grandmother, was the boss's younger sister. Your father wasn't just connected to the Valenti family, he was family. Blood. And in our world, blood is the only thing that matters." The words took a moment to sink in. Giovanni Valenti. The name was a legend in our city, a shadowy figure whose influence touched everything from construction projects to union leadership to who got elected to office. every newspaper story about organized crime mentioned his name. Every politician publicly denied any connection to him. Every serious business owner knew that certain major decisions required his tacit approval. "My father," I began, but the sentence trailed off. I didn't even know what to ask. "For 25 years, your father was the boss's most trusted advisor," Leo went on. "He managed the family's legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, investment portfolios. He was the bridge between our world and the one you know. The insurance job was real, but it was also a cover. A way to explain his comfortable living without drawing the wrong kind of attention to where the real money came from. The sedan moved through streets I'd known my whole life, but now everything looked foreign. That little Italian place on the corner where Dad used to take me for my birthday. Did we own it? The huge construction site downtown where a new high-rise was being built, was that Valenti money changing the city's skyline? He kept you completely separate from all this," Leo said, his voice gentle but firm. "Not because he was ashamed of you or the family, because he loved you. He wanted you to have a life he never did, a normal life with choices, free from the weight of family duty unless you chose to carry it." I thought about Dad's late-night phone calls that ended abruptly whenever I walked into the room, the hushed meetings in our living room, the way certain people treated him with a deference that bordered on fear when we were out in public, the comfortable life we led on his supposedly modest salary. All the puzzle pieces I'd never been able to fit together suddenly snapped into place with a devastating, breathtaking clarity. "Your father left very specific instructions," Leo continued, "about your education, your inheritance, and your introduction to the family. Nothing happens without your consent. Nothing will be forced on you. But the boss wanted to meet you, to explain things himself, to make sure you understood who your father really was and what he built for you. My father, Michael Valenti, not the worthless criminal Uncle Robert described, not the neighborhood deadbeat Jessica mocked. He was someone important enough that Leo Ricci himself came to his funeral, someone tied to the most powerful family in the city, someone who had spent 23 years shielding me from this truth while my mother's family treated us like dirt." "Where are we going?" I asked. "To meet the boss," Leo replied. "Your great uncle. He's been waiting to meet you properly since your father passed. He would have been at the funeral, but..." Leo paused. "Your father wanted your introduction to the family to be private, dignified, not a public spectacle at a cemetery." The car turned into a neighborhood I recognized, the historic district where old money lived in homes that had been passed down for generations. We pulled up to a set of massive iron gates that swung open silently, revealing a sprawling estate that looked like it was straight out of a movie. Leo's demeanor had shifted again. He was no longer the imposing enforcer from the cemetery, but more like a patient guide preparing a student for a life-changing exam. "Before we go in," he said, his hand resting lightly on my arm, "I need you to understand something. What comes next is up to you. The boss will lay out your inheritance, your options, your father's legacy, but you are not required to do anything. You can walk away from all of this with your father's legitimate fortune and live any life you wish. Or you can stay. You can learn. You can understand. You can take your place in the family your father came from." The gates clicked shut behind us. Through the windshield, I saw the main house. It was enormous, elegant, and radiated a kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. My father had come from this. He had been a part of this, and he had chosen to raise me away from it all because he loved me enough to give me a choice. And my mother's family, they had spent 23 years treating him like a complete failure. The rage that had been simmering since Jessica mocked my shoes at the funeral finally cooled and hardened into something sharp and focused. It wasn't the hot anger that makes you reckless, but the cold, calculated focus that Dad had taught me by example, watching him maintain his quiet dignity in the face of their constant insults. They had called him a worthless criminal. They had laughed at my grief. They had ridiculed my thrift store shoes. They had no idea who they had been dealing with. But they were about to find out, and I was going to make sure the lesson was one they would never forget. The sedan stopped in front of the main house, and Leo opened my door with that same careful courtesy. The October air felt different here, still heavy, as if even the wind knew to show respect on this property. A man in his 70s was waiting on the stone steps. He had white hair, an impeccably tailored suit, and dark, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything about me in a single glance. He moved with a strength and authority that defied his age. "Chloe," he said, and his voice held a trace of an old-world accent, something that spoke of Italy and generations of family history. "Please come inside." Leo gestured for me to go ahead, stepping back slightly in a clear show of deference that told me exactly who was in charge. I walked up the steps on legs that felt unsteady, still wearing the cheap shoes Jessica had mocked, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that the last hour of my life was real. The man extended his hand as I reached the top step. "I am Giovanni Valenti, your great-uncle, though we've never had the chance to meet properly." His grip was firm and reassuring. "I'm sorry it took your father's passing to bring you home." Home. The word felt strange, applied to a place I'd never seen, to people I'd never met. He led me through an entrance hall that looked like a museum, with marble floors, what looked like original, priceless paintings, and furniture that had clearly been in the family for a century. We walked down corridors where other men in suits nodded respectfully as we passed, their faces carefully blank. Giovanni Valenti's study smelled of old leather, books, and something else I couldn't place. Maybe cigars, or just the scent of a room where powerful decisions were made. 2 walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A massive desk dominated the room with leather chairs arranged near a grand fireplace. He gestured to one of the chairs. "Please, sit." I sank into the leather, which was both firm and comfortable, my hands gripping the armrests to stop them from trembling. Leo had taken up a position by the door, present but unobtrusive, a silent guardian. Don Giovanni studied my face for a long moment. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said softly. "Maria, my younger sister. She passed when you were just a toddler, but she would have adored you. Michael spoke of you constantly, your intelligence, your strength, your kindness. He was so proud of the woman you were becoming." Something in my chest ached at his words. This stranger, this man I'd never met, was validating my grief as real, as important, not as something pathetic or embarrassing. Losing your father. The Don's voice caught for a fraction of a second, a crack in his composure that I suspected few people ever saw. It was like losing a son. Michael was family in every way that counts. His death is a loss for all of us. He went to his desk and came back with a folder, thick with documents. When he set it on the small table between us, I saw my name written on the tab in neat, precise handwriting. "Your father was a very methodical man," Don Giovanni said, settling into the chair opposite me. "He planned for every contingency, including his own passing. These papers represent your inheritance." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The first page was a property deed for something called the Azure Bay Restaurant Group, a name I vaguely recognized. It listed 12 locations with addresses I knew. Beneath that were financial statements showing annual revenues in the millions. I flipped to the next document, Valenti Properties, 37 residential and commercial buildings scattered across the metro area, each with market valuations that made my head spin. Stock certificates, investment portfolios, bank statements with balances that had so many zeros, I had to count them twice to believe it. "Your father," Don Giovanni said quietly, "was worth approximately $52 million when he passed away, and every legitimate cent of it is now yours." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair, trying to anchor myself as my entire reality was being rewritten. $52 million. While Uncle Robert called him a worthless criminal. While Aunt Susan mocked our modest home. While Jessica laughed at my thrift store shoes. While my mother's family had spent 23 years treating us like poor relations who should know our place. My father had been worth $52 million. How? The word came out as a barely audible whisper. Your father was a genius with money, the Don explained. He began with the restaurants. One successful location, then another. He used the profits from one venture to fund the next. He acquired properties when the market was low, held them and sold them when their value peaked. He was a shrewd investor, and he did it all legally. Clean books, proper documentation, legitimate business practices. From his post by the door, Leo spoke up. But there's more to it than just the money, Miss Chloe. Don Giovanni nodded slowly, his expression turning more serious. He reached for a second folder, thinner than the first but somehow feeling much heavier. Your father also held certain responsibilities within our family organization, the Don said carefully. He mediated conflicts between business people who couldn't go to the regular courts. He offered protection services to legitimate businesses that were facing illegal threats. He made sure that certain operations, some legal, some less so, ran smoothly without unnecessary violence. He opened the second folder, revealing what looked like case files. Names, dates, situations, resolutions. I saw notes about restaurant owners being shaken down by gangs, construction companies facing sabotage, and small shop owners being threatened. Michael solved problems, Leo added, the kinds of problems the police can't or won't touch, the kinds that require an understanding of both the legitimate business world and the one that operates in its shadows. These responsibilities are not automatically passed down to you, Don Giovanni stated firmly. You inherit the money no matter what. You can walk away from all of this right now, live whatever life you want, and the family will completely respect that choice. Your father made absolutely sure you would have that option. I stared at the two folders on the table. One represented a level of legitimate wealth I couldn't even comprehend. The other represented a world I'd only ever heard about in movies. But, the Don continued, if you want to understand, if you want to learn what your father built and how he did it, that education is available to you. Everything Michael created can continue through you if that is what you decide. He stood and moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound photo album I hadn't seen. When he opened it, I saw photos from decades ago, family gatherings, celebrations, moments from a life Dad had kept completely hidden. There was a younger Dad laughing at some joke I would never hear, Dad standing next to a woman who had to be my grandmother. The resemblance was undeniable. Dad at weddings, baptisms, funerals, all the family events that took place in a world I never knew. Your grandmother, Maria, was my baby sister, Don Giovanni said, his finger gently tracing her face in a photo. When she married your grandfather, may he rest in peace, our father was furious. Your grandfather wasn't Italian, wasn't from our world, but Maria loved him. Michael grew up understanding both sides, the legitimate world and the family business. He became the bridge between them. I studied the photos, seeing my father's face in a new context. He looked confident, powerful, like someone who naturally commanded respect. He kept you separate not out of shame, the Don said softly, but out of love. He wanted you to have the choices he never had, a normal childhood, a future without the weight of family unless you chose to accept it. He closed the album and returned to his chair, his dark eyes studying my face with an unnerving intensity. So, I am asking you now, Chloe. What do you want? You can take the money and leave. No one will judge you. Or you can stay. You can learn. You can understand the world your father came from and the legacy he built for you. I thought about my mother, standing silently at the funeral, I thought about Aunt Susan's cruelty, Uncle Robert calling my dad a con man, and Jessica mocking my tears and my shoes as my dad's casket sat beside his grave. 23 years of being treated like garbage by people who had no idea who we really were. I want to learn, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I want to understand everything my father built. The Don's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Approval, perhaps, or satisfaction. And, I added quietly, I want certain people to understand exactly who they've been disrespecting. Don Giovanni and Leo exchanged a look. It was clear this was the answer they had been hoping for. Then your education begins tomorrow, the Don said. Leo will be your guide, your teacher, and your protection as you learn to navigate your inheritance. But tonight, you rest. Process what you've learned. Say goodbye to the girl you were and prepare for the woman you are about to become. Leo stepped forward. I'll take you home, Miss Chloe, unless you'd prefer to stay here. I shook my head. I needed to be in my own space, in the home I had shared with Dad to process the seismic shifts of the past few hours. Don Giovanni stood and embraced me. It wasn't a formal hug. It was the genuine affection of family. Your father loved you more than anything in this world, he said quietly. Everything he did to protect you and give you the future you deserve. Never forget that. As Leo drove me back through the city, I watched the buildings and businesses pass by with new eyes. That restaurant where Dad and I used to go for birthdays, was it one of the 12 Azure Bay locations? Those apartments being renovated downtown, were they Valenti properties? My entire life had been an island in the middle of my father's empire, and I had never even known it. The thrift store shoes Jessica had mocked suddenly felt different. Not shameful, just shoes. Meaningless details that people without real power fixate on because they have nothing else. I was the daughter of Michael Valenti, the heir to a $50 million empire, the great niece of Don Giovanni Valenti, and my mother's family had no idea what their cruelty at the funeral had just unleashed. Leo arrived at my door at 7 a.m. sharp the next morning, holding 2 cups of coffee and a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. Used to. Past tense. Because apparently I owned buildings now. The surreality hadn't faded overnight. Ready for your first day of school? He asked with a faint smile, handing me one of the coffees. It was just how I liked it, a little cream, no sugar. He was the kind of person who noticed details. We started at the Azure Bay Restaurant Group headquarters, a modest office building in a gentrifying neighborhood. Nothing flashy. Just a professional office with the company name on a tasteful bronze plaque. The woman who met us, Sophia Rossi, was in her 40s, with dark hair in a neat bun and a firm handshake. Miss Valenti, she said, and hearing my last name spoken with such respect felt foreign. I'm Sophia Rossi. I managed operations for your father for 12 years. She led us to a conference room where financial reports were laid out. As she walked me through the numbers, I saw these weren't just restaurants. They were well-oiled machines that provided jobs for hundreds of families. Your father knew every manager by name, Sophia explained, her voice filled with pride. People didn't work for him because they were scared. They worked for him because he treated them with fairness and respect. She showed me payroll records and supplier contracts. Everything was perfectly documented and professionally managed. This wasn't the work of a criminal, it was the work of a brilliant, compassionate businessman. He never missed a payroll, she said softly. Not even during the recession. He took personal losses before he'd ever lay someone off. I thought about Uncle Robert calling him a con man. The irony was sickening. After Azure Bay, Leo took me to Valenti Properties, where I met James Miller, a man in his 50s who had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades dealing with buildings and tenants. Your father had a philosophy about real estate, James explained as we drove past several of the properties. Buy in neighborhoods that needed help, renovate properly, and charge fair rent. He wasn't running a charity, but he believed in creating stable communities. We stopped at an apartment building that had recently been renovated. "This building was condemned when your father bought it," James said. "Drug dealers in half the units. The city was going to tear it down. Your father cleaned it out, renovated it, and turned it into affordable housing. The families here now, most have been here over a decade." Dad hadn't been a slumlord. He'd been a community builder. Every person I met that week spoke of Dad with genuine love. It wasn't the fake sympathy you hear at funerals. It was real respect earned over years of fair dealings. The contrast with my mother's family was staggering. On the fourth day, Leo took me to a small office to meet Maria Garcia. She was sharp, direct, and wasted no time. "Your father handled what we call community relations," she said, gesturing to a wall of file cabinets, "problems that the usual channels can't solve." She pulled a file. Inside were notes about a small business owner being extorted by a local gang. "The police couldn't help. The victim was too afraid to testify," Maria said. "Your father stepped in. He had a conversation with the gang's leadership, explained that this business was under Valenti protection, and the problem disappeared. No violence. She showed me case after case. Businesses saved, families protected. Your father prevented violence," she said firmly. "He wasn't a saint. This work gets messy, but he had a code. Protect the innocent, stop the bullies." On the sixth day, Leo brought me to a small, clean auto repair shop in a neighborhood I knew from my childhood. The owner, David Chen, came out wiping his hands on a rag, his face etched with exhaustion. He was about 55, with the defeated look of a man watching his life's work crumble. "Miss Valenti," he said, his handshake firm despite his stress, "I appreciate you coming. Your father helped me out once, years ago. I was hoping, well, that you might have inherited his sense of fairness." He explained that a large corporate chain had moved in and was trying to drive him out of business with predatory pricing, vandalism, and fake complaints to city inspectors. "I've lost half my customers in 3 months, David said, his voice cracking. "I have 5 employees with families to feed. Another month of this and I'll have to close down for good." Leo watched me, his expression unreadable. This was a test, my first real decision. I asked questions, gathering the facts. It was a clear case of corporate bullying. The cold, focused anger I'd felt at Dad's funeral returned. This was exactly the kind of injustice Dad would have fought. "Give me 3 days, I told David. "Don't make any decisions. Just give me 3 days." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you," he whispered. As we left, Leo's expression held a hint of approval. "Your father would have handled it the same way," he said. "Listen, assess, promise nothing specific, but offer hope. Then deliver results." "How would he have delivered?" I asked. "By finding their pressure points," Leo replied. "Everyone has a vulnerability. The trick is to apply quiet, effective pressure right where it hurts the most." That evening, I went to the small house Mom and I had shared with Dad. She was surrounded by boxes, packing up his things. She looked up as I entered, her face a mixture of guilt and fear. "Chloe," she said awkwardly, "I wasn't sure you'd come back." I sat in Dad's old recliner. "What did you know, Mom?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "About Dad's real life, his family." She sat down heavily. "I knew he came from money," she admitted in a small voice. "I knew he had connections. He told me early on that his family's business was complicated and that the less I knew, the safer we'd be. And I chose not to know." "Even when your family treated him like dirt for 23 years? She flinched. "I was afraid defending him would make things worse, that my family would cut us off." "You mean they'd cut you off," I corrected. "You were worried about losing their approval, not about Dad's dignity." "I was scared," she whispered, "of being alone. So you sacrificed us instead." She started to cry, but her tears just made me feel tired. "The men at the funeral," she said after a moment, "that was his family." "Yes, and they came for me." "What are you going to do?" she asked. Learn, I said simply, and take my place in the family he came from. Chloe, that world. It's my birthright, I interrupted, whether you like it or not. I left without another word. The gulf between us had never felt so wide. 3 months passed, 3 months of intensive education with Leo, transforming me from a grieving girl in thrift store shoes into someone who understood power. Then Jessica called. My phone rang on a Tuesday night while I was reviewing property portfolios in the study of the new townhouse I'd purchased. The number made me pause. I hadn't heard from any of them since the funeral. Chloe, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I've been thinking about you so much. How are you? I let the silence hang for an uncomfortably long moment. I'm fine, Jessica. What do you want? Well, she said, the sweetness cracking a little. I know things were tense at Uncle Michael's funeral, but we're family, right? And I thought maybe we could reconnect. Get lunch? Lunch, I repeated, waiting for the real reason. Actually, she said, getting to it, I heard you inherited some money from Uncle Michael, and Kyle and I are starting this amazing boutique marketing agency. We just need an investor who believes in family supporting family. I almost laughed. The audacity. The same cousin who called us the pathetic family now wanted a handout from an inheritance she'd assumed didn't exist. How much? I asked, my voice calm. To really launch right, we'd need about $60,000, but even 30 or 40 would be a huge help. And of course, you'd get a return on your investment. $60,000. To her, it was a fortune. She had no idea I could write that check without a second thought. That's interesting, I said. Tell me your business plan. She launched into a rambling, buzzword-filled pitch that made it clear she had no idea what she was talking about. When she finally finished, I said, You know what? This sounds like something we should discuss properly. Why don't we talk about it at Christmas dinner? I'm hosting this year. There was a long pause. Christmas dinner? At your place? I have more space now, I said simply, and I think it's time for some new family traditions. I'll send invitations to everyone. You, Kyle, your parents, my mother. We can discuss your business proposal then. She reluctantly agreed. After I hung up, I called Leo. My cousin just hit me up for $60,000. I told him, I think it's time for the Christmas revelation. How do you want to play it? He asked, his voice full of approval. I want them all there, I said, and I want undeniable proof. Bank statements, property deeds, business licenses, everything that shows them exactly who my father was. Consider it done, he said. The dossiers arrived 5 days later. Leo spread them across my dining table. Uncle Robert's import business was on the brink of bankruptcy, drowning in debt from bad decisions. Aunt Susan had 6-figure credit card debt from buying designer clothes to keep up appearances. Jessica and Kyle were both unemployed, living off their parents while pretending to be entrepreneurs. The marketing agency was a desperate fantasy. They spent 2 decades looking down on your family, Leo said quietly, while their own lives were built on a house of cards. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They'd called my dad a broke con man while he was sitting on a $50 million legitimate empire. I don't want to destroy them, I said. I just want to show them the truth. I spent the next week preparing. I bought an estate in the historic district, a place whose address alone would send a message. I hired an event coordinator and planned a dinner that whispered elegance. Catering from Azure Bay's flagship restaurant, wines from Dad's private collection. We prepared presentation folders for each family member, filled with documents proving Dad's success. The night before the dinner, I met with Don Giovanni. What do you hope to accomplish tomorrow? He asked. Part of me wants to make them suffer, I admitted. He nodded without judgment. But I don't think that's what Dad would have wanted. He was always so patient with them. Let me tell you a story about revenge, he said. When I was a young man, someone humiliated my father. I wanted blood. But my father told me something I never forgot. Revenge shouldn't be about destruction. It should be about balance, about teaching a lesson that creates understanding. What did you do? I asked. I showed the man the truth about himself, he replied. I revealed his own weaknesses in a way he couldn't deny. That lesson lasted far longer than any physical pain. He leaned forward. You have the power to destroy them financially. But is that what your father would have wanted? He taught you patience and dignity by his example. I thought about my dad handling their insults with quiet strength. I want them to understand who they disrespected, I said slowly, to see the truth, but I don't want to become as cruel as they were. Don Giovanni smiled, a rare, warm expression. You are more like your father than you know, he said, raising his glass. Tomorrow you show them the truth. That is justice, Chloe. Real justice. Christmas Eve arrived. Uncle Robert's car pulled through the iron gates at 5:45. I watched them get out. Aunt Susan, her eyes swiveling, trying to calculate the cost of everything. Uncle Robert, his face a mask of envy. Jessica and Kyle, their expressions a mix of resentment and greed. My mother trailed behind them all, radiating discomfort. I opened the door myself. Chloe, Aunt Susan said, her voice overly bright. This house, my goodness. How on earth did you afford this? Dad left me well provided for, I said simply, leading them into the grand foyer. The room did the talking for me. Quite an upgrade from that little house, Uncle Robert observed, making it sound like an insult. Dinner began with strained small talk. By the main course, Uncle Robert's patience had worn out. So, Chloe, he said, we should probably discuss your situation. My situation? I asked calmly. This house, this sudden wealth, we're your family. We just want to make sure you're not involved in anything questionable, Aunt Susan added, the irony so thick it was suffocating. Dad left me several businesses to manage, I said, retrieving the presentation folders. I thought it was time you all understood who Michael Valenti really was. I placed a folder in front of each of them. I started with the Azure Bay Restaurant Group, walking them through the business licenses, the property deeds, and financial statements showing millions in annual revenue. This is fake, Uncle Robert said, but his voice was weak. I slid notarized documents across the table. Official seals, city records, federal tax returns, irrefutable proof. Jessica's face went pale. Aunt Susan stared at the papers in horror. I continued with Valenti properties, the investment portfolios, the stock certificates. I don't understand, Mom whispered. Dad built a legitimate business empire, I said. He just chose to live quietly. Why would he hide all this money? Aunt Susan shrieked. If he was worth $52 million, I finished for her. That's what Dad was worth when he died, and every legitimate penny now belongs to me. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Madison gasped. Uncle Robert's face turned a sickly white. Aunt Susan's expression cycled through shock, rage, and finally, dawning horror as she realized what she'd said at the funeral of a man worth $52 million. That's not possible, Uncle Robert stammered. Mom knew Dad had money, I said, looking right at her. She just chose not to tell you, isn't that right, Mom? She stared at her plate, silent as always. I own property all over this city now, I continued. I employ hundreds of people. Everything you thought you knew about us was wrong. The silence was deafening. Then Jessica, desperate, tried to salvage her pitch. Chloe, I know this is a lot, but about our marketing agency. Why should I invest $60,000 in a business run by someone who mocked my shoes at my father's funeral? The question landed with a thud. Jessica's face flushed a deep, humiliating red. I didn't mean anything by that, she stammered. You called us the pathetic family, I said quietly. You laughed while my father's body was waiting to be buried. I pulled out the second set of folders, the ones with Leo's research. Since we're talking business, let's review your financial situations. I laid it all out. Uncle Robert's failing business, Aunt Susan's six-figure debt, Jessica and Kyle's unemployment. You spent 23 years calling us poor, I said, my voice level and cold, and all the while, your own lives were one emergency away from complete collapse. You mocked a man worth $52 million, and now you want his daughter to bail you out with the inheritance you claimed didn't exist. Aunt Susan burst into tears of rage and humiliation. Where did you get our financial information? Uncle Robert demanded, his voice shaking. Successful people have resources, I said simply. Dad taught me that. They fled. Like the house was on fire, they scrambled for the door, slamming it shut behind them. My mother just sat there, tears sliding down her face. You knew, I said quietly. She nodded. And you let them treat us like that anyway. Another nod. I was exhausted. You can stay or you can go, I told her. Your choice. I walked away, leaving her alone with the ruins of our family. An hour later, Mom was still at the table. I knew, she whispered finally, about the money, the connections. He made me promise not to tell my family. He said they couldn't be trusted. So you let them torture us for 2 decades. I was scared, she cried. I thought defending him would make things worse. You weren't protecting us, I said. You were protecting yourself from making a hard choice. She had no answer. She left soon after, disappearing into the same silence she'd lived in for years. The next morning, Leo called. We have a problem. Your Uncle Robert is asking questions, loudly, about the Valenti family. My stomach sank. The Don wants a meeting. In Don Giovanni's study, he looked almost pleased. Actions have consequences, Chloe. You wanted them to understand, and now they are reacting. Robert's questions could put you or your mother in danger. So, what do? He laid out 3 options. 1. Threaten Robert into silence. 2. Feed him controlled information. Or 3, he said, give him what he wants. His business is failing. We give him a loan. We turn a threat into an obligation. It's what your father would have done. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Sarah, Mom's youngest sister, who had moved away years ago. I just got off the phone with Susan, she said, her voice tight with anger. She was ranting about Christmas dinner, about how you humiliated them. I told her she was an idiot who finally got what she deserved. She paused. There's something you should know. 12 years ago, my husband left me. I was broke with 2 kids. I called Michael. He sent me $15,000, a gift, not a loan. He said family helps family. He saved me. But he made me promise not to tell Susan or Robert. He said they wouldn't understand. My eyes filled with tears. There's more, she added. Susan is talking about challenging Michael's will, claiming the money is illegal. She's looking for a lawyer. I hung up and returned to the study, my mind reeling. I told the Don everything. He was calm. The will is ironclad. Let her waste her money. The question is still, Robert, what is your decision? I thought of Dad's generosity to Aunt Sarah, his patient strength. Option 3, I said finally, we give him the loan. We create an obligation. Don Giovanni smiled. Your father would be proud. Leo arranged the meeting at David Chen's auto shop. When Robert arrived, expecting to gossip, he found me and Leo waiting in the office. He paled. What is this? Your loud questions are putting people in danger, I said, cutting to the chase, including your own sister. David stepped forward. Your brother-in-law saved my business 10 years ago. That's what the Valenti family does. They help people. And your questions, Leo added softly, are making people wonder if we have a problem that needs handling. Robert finally understood. What do you want? He asked, his voice small. I'm going to make you an offer, I said. A one-time cash infusion of $50,000 to save your business, and I'll connect you with consultants who can help you fix it. In exchange, you stop asking questions, you treat my mother with decency, and you publicly apologize for what you said about my father. His pride warred with his desperation. Publicly? It means calling the relatives who heard you at the funeral and telling them the truth. Leo placed a bank check for $50,000 on the desk. Robert stared at it. "Fine," he said finally. "I accept." I handed him my phone. "Call Aunt Sarah first, on speaker." His hand trembled as he dialed. "Melissa." I was wrong," he stammered. "Michael Valente was a successful, legitimate businessman. I misjudged him. I disrespected him at his funeral, and I regret my words." After that call, he made 2 more, his apology growing smoother each time. When he finished, Leo slid him the check. He grabbed it and left without another word. 2 days later, a threatening letter arrived from Aunt Susan's lawyer. I called Dad's attorney, who laughed. "This is toothless. She has no case. We'll bury her in so much legitimate paperwork she'll drown." That evening, a tear-streaked Jessica showed up at my door. "Can we talk?" she pleaded. In my living room, she confessed everything. "I've been jealous of you my whole life," she said, her voice breaking. "Not of what you had, but of your dad. He really loved you. My dad just sees me as a reflection of himself." She apologized, a real, raw apology for the first time in her life. "I'm not asking for money," she said. "I just wanted to say I was sorry." I saw something genuine in her, a flicker of hope. I offered to help her find real work, to build something honest. She accepted. Weeks later, Don Giovanni hosted an event to honor my father's contributions to the community. Scholarships he'd funded, businesses he'd saved. Over 100 people were there. At the end, he invited Uncle Robert to speak. Robert walked to the microphone, his hands shaking. "I'm Dennis Harper," he began, "and for 23 years, I misjudged Michael Valente completely. I let prejudice blind me. I called him a crook. I said cruel, wrong things at his funeral." He looked directly at me. "Chloe, I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong." It was awkward and rehearsed, but it was sincere, and it was public. Afterward, people shared stories about Dad's quiet generosity. Mom appeared at my side. "I'm moving," she said, "to Oregon to be near Sarah. I can't stay here, surrounded by reminders of how I failed you and your father." She handed me a worn envelope. "He wrote this for you years ago. He said to give it to you when you were ready. I think you're ready now." I opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Chloe," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I kept my world separate to give you choices I never had. Real strength isn't about money or power. It's about knowing who you are and using what you have to make life better for others. Whether you walk away from what I built or embrace it, I will be proud of you. The choice is what matters. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest legacy. I love you, Dad." I cried then, not with anger, but with pure grief for the man who had loved me so completely. In the year that followed, I learned and I built. I established the Michael Valente Foundation to continue his charitable work. Jessica started working her way up from the bottom at one of our restaurants, earning her success. Aunt Sarah became a trusted mentor. One evening, Don Giovanni told me, "Your father built the foundation. Now you are building the future. The family must evolve or it breaks." Driving home, I thought about the girl in the thrift store shoes. She was gone, transformed. My father's greatest gift wasn't the $52 million. It was teaching me that true strength is knowing who you are. And now, I was using that strength to build a legacy worthy of his name. If this story of justice and legacy had you hooked from that first funeral insult to the final triumph, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when those black sedans pulled up at the cemetery and Leo Ricci bowed to Chloe while her family's faces went white. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Want more powerful revenge stories where the underestimated rise up and reclaim what's theirs? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.